Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. Welcome to the live stream for Aardvark accessibility testing. I'm just going to adjust my camera a little so that my name isn't over my face. There we go. All right. So, welcome. I figured what we would do today is we would work on the WCAG Easy Checks on our feature page. So this is a new page that we just added to our website. So always a good idea to do a quick check on it and make sure everything is looking good. So let me bring up WCAG Easy Checks. And here they are. So this is what we're going to step through today. So I'll show you how you can do these on your own website. So to be clear, this is not a comprehensive accessibility audit, right? But it is a good indication of how well your site is doing, and it can help you catch some really common issues that are relatively straightforward to fix. You'll notice that there is a draft of the new version. I have taken a look at that. I don't think it's quite ready to go. So we're going to use this current draft or the current version that's out right now. Also, apologies, but there is some kind of construction going on in my neighborhood. I have the windows closed, but hopefully it's not coming through too much on the stream. Just comment and let me know if it's a problem. I don't know what I can do about it, but they didn't ask me if today was a good day for construction, and they didn't ask me if this time was okay. All right, so this is the rough kind of outline of what we do when we do the WCAG Easy Checks. Check the page title, check images for alternative text, go through the text to take a look at headings, at contrast ratio to make sure that our text has sufficient contrast with the background, and then also to make sure that when we resize text, that the page still works, that we don't lose any content, that we don't lose any functionality. Then we're going to go through and test with keyboard access, make sure that if we are using keyboard only to navigate through the site, that we can see where focus is and that we can interact with everything on the page that we could use with the mouse. So we're not losing any kind of functionality. We'll take a look at any forms, although I don't believe there are any forms on this page, but we'll double check. And then a few general things. We want to check for any moving, flashing, or blinking content. I don't think there's any of that on this page. Any multimedia. I don't think we have any of that today. And just a basic structure check. Sorry. All right, so we'll go ahead, and there is a video here to kind of show you how to do this, but I'm going to show you how to do it live today. So you can just follow along with me. You have your favorite website that you want to take a look at. You can follow along with what we're doing. So some simple tools that we're going to be using. I am using Firefox for the test today. I like using Firefox for this, and I have a browser add-on that is a free add-on. It doesn't cost anything, called Web Dev Toolbar, and it is this purple cog right here. It adds a bunch of functionality to the site that makes it really easy for testing, and you'll see kind of as we go along. But that is one of the only tools that we need. The other free browser add-on that I have is this one called Color Picker, which is going to allow me to choose colors from the website so that I can test their color contrast. So the color contrast rule is you want to make sure that your text has sufficient contrast with the background color that it appears on so that it's easy to read, right? You wouldn't want to have pale gray text on a white background, for example. That's going to be too hard to read. So basically, we want to check the background color, the foreground color, and we would go to a tool like this. So color, if we just look for color contrast checker, I usually use this one from WebAIM, but as you can see in the search results, There are dozens, maybe even hundreds of them to choose from. So find one that you like. They're all doing what is essentially a pretty simple and straightforward math equation to figure out if there's sufficient contrast between the foreground and the background color. Um, so it doesn't really matter which tool you use. I will admit that this tool here is not the prettiest, right? And there are some options that are a little more nicely designed. But I'm really accustomed to using this one, and I think it has some nice features. Uh, so it shows me the contrast ratio, and then it shows me for normal size text, for large text, and then for graphical objects and icons. So it will give me all three ratings, and it will show me both AA and AAA and whether or not it passes or fails. So we'll dig into that a little bit later today. So that is all we need is a free browser, a couple of free browser add-ons, and then a free color contrast checker. That is all the tools that we need to step through the WCAG Easy Checks. So let's start going through them. So the first thing that we want to check is the page title. And it will show you these easy checks will show you what to do the test and then what to check for. Okay, so to do this page title test, we're going to look at the page's title, or we can listen to it with a screen reader. And we want to look at titles of other pages within the website. We're going to skip this one today because I'm just focused on this one new page that we've added to the site. We've already done pretty extensive testing on a lot of the other pages of the site. And what do I want to check for? I want to check to make sure that the title accurately describes the content of the page. And I also want to make sure that the title is different from the other pages of the site. So that's an issue that we see sometimes, is that a site will have just one title that gets used, the same title all across every page of the site, which is obviously not ideal. So we're going to double check that and make sure that the title is different. So this is my site, so I happen to know that this title is different. And to check the page title, I know in Chrome and Firefox both, all you have to do is hover your mouse over the tab at the top of the browser like I did just now. Now, I can't move my mouse to actually point at the full title that popped up, but it is right under the tab. We saw that box pop up that currently says Aardvark Features for Accessibility and aardvarkaccessibility.com in that little box. You can see that little box goes away as soon as I move my mouse. So that's what we're looking at. And this is our new features page. Basically, what it does is collect up these 4 features and just add links out to these individual pages, is all this page is doing. So I think in this case, Aardvark Features for Accessibility is a perfectly acceptable title for this page. It tells me what's here, what I can expect to see, and it is an accurate description of what's happening on this page. All right, so let's go ahead and move on to the next easy check, which is image text alternatives. So let me show you the alt text decision tree. All right, so figuring out whether or not an image needs alt text and what that alt text should be is maybe not as straightforward as you might assume at first. So let's talk about it for a minute. And we'll go through this alt text decision tree. Let's go back over to this page and find whatever our first image is. Okay, so our first image is this one. Obviously a metaphor. Nobody is looking at a screen this big when they're looking at the web. But here we go. So this is the image that we have. The first question that we want to ask is, does the image contain text? And our answer this time, I have to go back to this tab, is yes, it does have this 16 issues remediated box that's here. So there is a little bit of text in this image. I would say it is not the main purpose of that image, right? That text is almost there as an afterthought or just to kind of illustrate what's happening here, right? Because this is a chart that we have, for example, in the UI of our product that just shows us our issues by severity, right? Where maybe this would be critical issues and this would be high priority issues and this is maybe low priority issues as part of this donut chart. And then this one is showing 16 issues remediated, right? Or 16 issues that have been resolved or fixed. Um, so we would say yes. And now we have a few options. And the text is also present as real text nearby. Well, that's not the case. We don't have 16 issues remediated anywhere near the image. And the text is only shown for visual effects. I would say that our text falls under this category. Um, it's just there. It's not actually communicating information. It's just there to kind of demonstrate a sample UI of a product. And the text has a specific function. I would say no, that's not true. And the text in the image is not present otherwise. Okay, so I do think that we're here, and it does say to use an empty alt attribute saying that this is a decorative image, but I think we're going to keep going because this is not an image of just text, right? There's a lot of other stuff going on in here, and it just has a little bit of text in it, like almost as a side coincidence and not as the main purpose of the image. So I think we could pretend that we answered no here. So we're going to go ahead and continue down the tree. So the next question is the image used in a link or a button? And would it be hard or impossible to understand what the link or button does if the image wasn't there? So no, this is not, it's not a link. Nothing happens when I click on it. So we can keep going. Does the image contribute meaning to the current page or context? So here we have a few options under yes. It's a simple graphic or photograph. It's a graph or complex piece of information. And it shows content that is redundant to real text nearby. I would say that this one probably falls under this category that it is a simple graphic or photograph. Now, I know that there is a graph on here as part of this image, but there's not any actual data being communicated by that chart, right? Like I can't see any actual percentages. I can't see the key for what the image is, right? The graph is just there as decoration, basically, or to communicate, to suggest a sample UI for the product. So, and there's another one over here, but it's the same thing, right? I have absolutely no idea from looking at this image what that data might be or what that graph might be communicating. So the purpose of that image is not to present that data that's in those graphs. It's just to show a sample UI. So, oops, sorry, I forgot to turn off my time tracking. I feel like I did this last time. All right, let's disable that for an hour and that won't bother us anymore. All right, so here, since this is the case, I think that this image falls into is the, it's the closest case. It says that we should use a brief description of the image in a way that conveys that meaning in the alt attribute. Right, so the question was, does the image contribute meaning? I think the image does contribute meaning. Now, this is an image that's definitely falling into a gray area where I do think some people would look at this image and think, nope, that's just a decorative image, right? It's just there to make the page look pretty. It's not actually communicating any kind of information. But I think for me, I kind of come down on the other side of this argument because this is a page where we are talking about features of aardvark. We are talking about a product, and this is a mock-up of a screenshot for what the product might look like. So because that is the case, I think that we probably do want to have some alt text on this image to give some basic description of what this image is doing here and what kind of information it might be communicating to people. So let's go back over here to our WCAG Easy Checks. And what we are checking for is that every image has alt text with appropriate alternative text, right? So we wouldn't want to have alternative text on this image that said, I don't know, a basket of strawberries sitting on a picnic table, right? Because that is not an accurate description of what that image is. So this is where automated tools can sometimes let us down, because an automated tool can pretty easily check to see if there is alt text there and could say, yep, there's alt text, everything's good. But it can't check to see if our alt text is, just wildly inaccurate. It's just way out of line with what the image actually is. So that's something that still requires a human to take a look at. It is potentially an area where AI could eventually help us out with accessibility. This is a potential area. But where AI kind of falls down a little bit on this kind of task right now is that AI is pretty good at looking at an image like this and saying, like, oh, okay, this looks like we have a person who's a wheelchair user who's looking at what looks like a stylized UI of an audit report, basically. And AI could probably get pretty close to that, to describing that that's what this image is. However, we have to make sure that the alt text is appropriate for the context that the image is used in. And there are times when what kind of alt text you add to an image really depends on the context that you're using the image in. So let me see if I can think of a good example. Yes, I have a good example from a real client's website that I worked on several years ago. So they had on their website a photo of a concert venue, and the photo was accompanying an article about how the concert venue had been sued because all of their accessible seating in the venue was at the very, very, very back. So anybody who needed accommodation with their seating was stuck essentially in the very, very back row. And the photo of the concert venue was a pretty standard photo that you would see of a concert venue. It was kind of taken from the back of the venue, looking toward the stage, right? And I think it's fine for me to mention what it was. It was Red Rocks, that's in Colorado, right? So it's a very beautiful outdoor amphitheater surrounded by beautiful mountains and things like that. And so in the context that that image was used in, right, the purpose of that image being on the page was to show what the view was like from the accessible seating, right? The purpose of that photo was to show, here is as close to the stage as you can get if you are, for example, a wheelchair user and you have requested accessible seating. Here's where you're going to be, the very back of the venue. And this is all the closer you're going to be able to get to the stage. So that was the purpose of that image on the page. And so we wanted to have the alt text properly describe that here is an image showing how far from the stage the accessible seating is and how teeny tiny the stage looks in this photo because it's so far away. In another context, right? So on a page that was maybe a travel site that was giving ratings of the venue or something like that, that exact same photo might have had very different alt text because that photo was actually very aesthetically pleasing. It was very beautiful. It showed all the surrounding mountains, and there was a lot of beautiful blue sky that was visible, right? And it was a beautiful photo of the venue. But in a different context, right, I would say, oh, look at this beautiful concert venue, this beautiful amphitheater with, you can see mountains in the background and you can see blue skies and all this beautiful scenery that's surrounding the amphitheater. So if I'm trying to, entice people to come and see the venue, I could use that exact same photo to kind of show, look how beautiful the surroundings of this amphitheater are. But in an article relating to where the accessible seating is in the venue, I can use that exact same photo to demonstrate how far from the stage the accessible seating is. So, two different purposes, right? Two different contexts of the exact same image. And we would want to make sure that the alt text that we use on the image in those two different cases was also different, right? On the page where we're talking about, look how far away from the stage the accessible seating is, we would want to convey that in the alt text of that image. And on the other page with a completely different purpose, showing, look how beautiful this amphitheater is, right? We would have completely different alt text that would, put some emphasis on, oh, I see all these beautiful mountains, I see this beautiful sky, and things like that. So you cannot have just one set of alt text for an image, no matter how it gets used. And that's AI films now on generate alternative text. Did I just do this for a second? I don't know. It says, my Wi-Fi up here shows I have a pretty strong signal. I wonder if StreamYard is having an issue. Okay, I hope the stream is coming through okay. Just leave a comment if it's not and let me know, and I'll see what I can do. I do have another Wi-Fi network I could switch to try out. This one is usually pretty good though, but who knows? All different kinds of, there's so many moving pieces in a live stream, so something somewhere could be going wrong. Okay, so to get back to what I was saying, that is where AI kind of falls down right now. When we use a tool to automatically generate alt text for images, that's where it can let us down, is that it's not always going to be possible to pick up on the exact context of why a particular image is included on a page and what the context is and what aspects of the image should actually be explicitly stated in the alternative text. All right, so let's go back to our easy checks and we'll take a look. So what we're checking for is that our alt attributes are appropriate. And we have some tips here on appropriate alt text, what you don't need in the alt text, which is a thing that a lot of people will make the mistake of saying a picture of or an image of at the beginning, and you do not need to include that. You also don't, if it's a button or a link, you also don't need to include that. You don't have to say a link to something. Assistive technology that people would be using is already going to explain that to them. So you don't need to add that in your alternative text. All right, so we're going to use the Web Dev toolbar, and so we can open this content area and figure out how to do that. And it's telling us, wow, this is a really old screenshot. Okay. Anyway, I think it will still work. So actually I know it still works because I've done this test already before. So we're going to go into the Web Dev toolbar. We're going to go to images, then outline images, and outline images without alt attributes. So let's go back over here to our page and we'll go over here. We go to images and outline images without alt attributes. And I'm also going to have it outline images with empty alt attributes. And you can see that when I clicked that, an outline popped up around this image, which means that this is an image with an empty alt attribute. So let's go ahead and check these one at a time. So images without alt attributes. Sorry, that's a little bit hard to say when you say it multiple times. So let's go ahead and just scroll down the page. Okay, so we've got an image here of the logo that doesn't have an outline, so that's good. This one doesn't have an outline. No outline there. No outline there. No outline there. I actually do wonder, I see some of these are lazy loading into the page, and we have a few images here. And I wonder if that outline is actually going to work. So I think let's toggle it off and back on again now that all of the images are loaded, just to make sure that it caught them all. So let's scroll back up slowly. Okay, so it looks like it is not highlighting anything as completely missing an alt attribute. Okay, so I think we're good there. So let's go ahead and say with empty alt attributes. Now, what is the difference between an image that has no alt attribute and an empty alt attribute? Okay, so if an image is decorative and should not get alternative text, the correct way to do that is to have an alt attribute on the image that is empty. That tells assistive technology that you are aware that images should have alt text, but you have a decorative image. Good example of decorative images are when you have, different design little pieces of design. I can actually, is there, I don't, we keep this artwork site um, pretty minimal, right, as far as design goes. And so I don't think that we have any places where we actually have images inserted for design, but I know that we have another website where we do. So let's take a look over there just so I can kind of show you here. Not decorative. Right, so something like this where you have this circle, right? That's a good example of a decorative image. It's not communicating any kind of information whatsoever. It is only there for aesthetic purposes, right? To be a part of the design. Um, and I think we have, it's a little bit hidden under our help sign, but you can see that there's some little shapes down there. That's another good example of a decorative image, right? It is not conveying any kind of information at all. It is just there for decorative purposes. And so that's the kind of image that you would put an alt attribute on it, but then you would leave the alt attribute empty. So what we are checking when we are outlining images with empty alt attributes is these are images that we have designated when we've put together this page. We have said these are decorative images. They're just there for aesthetic purposes as part of the design. They aren't conveying any kind of information. Um, and there's nothing that would need to be shared with assistive technology. So as we go down the page, we see that this does actually have an outline on it. So this is marked as a decorative image. I think that probably what has happened recently is that decorative images have gotten a little bit out of hand, right? We do tend to use images on websites for aesthetic purposes that aren't necessarily strongly communicating any kind of information. And this is a good example of that kind of thing, right? Where people will just go out and get free stock photos to put as featured images on their blog posts and things like that, for example. And there was a thought for quite some time that those are just decorative images. They're not communicating any kind of information. They're just there for aesthetic purposes. But thought has shifted a little bit on these, I feel like. And there does seem to be an opinion that if the image is contributing to the kind of aesthetic feel of the page, right, that does count as some kind of information that's being conveyed by the image, and it should therefore be reflected in the alt text. And I think that this is probably a case where we could take a look at this and definitely consider adding some simple alt text to this image to say, this is a stylized audit report, for example, and it's, being viewed by a wheelchair user who is looking at the audit report. Obviously, that was very rambling and not very good, but something along those lines I think could probably be added to this image as alternative text. And we go down a little bit further. And I think also that this image, another thing that makes this to me maybe not a decorative image, right? Although it's debatable, I think, is that it is showing like a stylized audit result, and it is next to a section of text that is discussing audit management. So there is definitely a relationship there between that image and the text that's next to it. Right? We wouldn't necessarily swap that out with a completely different image because it might not be a good fit for audit management. So I think that's a good argument for the case for this image having some alternative text. Okay, our next section, we have another image that is marked as having an empty alt attribute. And again, I think it's a very similar situation. So obviously we have a very stylized UI because we don't live in Minority Report, right? We do have a person who is using what appears to be like a stylized UI of Aardvark's visual mode, right? But it's as big as she is, and she's like physically interacting with what appears to be a little piece of paper coming out of the screen. But this is like a pretty decent, stylized, but pretty accurate representation of what visual mode looks like. And it is next to a section of text that's talking about visual mode. So I think we can make a pretty good argument for this case that that should have alt text on it, like explaining that it's a stylized visual mode UI. And then remediation management, same thing here. Now, obviously, this is not how you actually do remediation on websites. It would be wonderful if you did use a wrench to go in and fix a website. Um, that would be super fun. But unfortunately, what you are usually doing is, how you look at remediating a website is pretty much how you look when you're building a website or how you look when you're, I don't know, doom scrolling your favorite social media, right? It's like you're just sitting at your desk with your headphones on, looking at a screen, and right, like there's not. That's what it really looks like. But because this is like a metaphor of remediating a website that has some issues, I think for this case, we could make a good argument that it should have alternative text that would kind of describe the little metaphor that's happening here. And then our last one, right, is again, it's a stylized UI showing a scan, although in this case, like it's a metaphor, right? It's like actually doing some kind of like a scan, like a Xerox machine or something of a website, right? But we are talking about in the text next to it, we are talking about scanning and monitoring. So I think we could make a pretty good argument that maybe that is not a strictly decorative image and it should have some alt text that kind of describes its purpose and why it's on the page. All right. So interestingly, I see that this image here did not get highlighted, which tells me it wasn't highlighted as having no alt attribute and it wasn't highlighted as having an empty alt attribute. So maybe that has alt text. So we'll check that in a minute. We'll come back to it. And then we have this series of icons here, which I think you could probably make a pretty good case for these being decorative. I wouldn't say that they're very strongly conveying any kind of information about these different sections of text. So we'll figure out what's going on with those. I think my current theory on what those are is that those are font icons that are probably not being recognized by the web dev browser plugin as being images, right? Because they're actually fonts. But let's go ahead and look down the page. All right. And then we have another stylized UI image of somebody who's maybe doing an audit, maybe reviewing the results of an audit, maybe fixing some things. It's a little bit difficult to tell. And the accompanying text here is free accessibility scans for your homepage. And I would say the relationship between this text and this image is definitely looser than it was on the other sections of the page. And this is a case where I would maybe lean a little bit more toward this actually being correct, that this is a decorative image that doesn't need to have alternative text. Okay, and then we've got our logo in the footer, which isn't highlighted in either case. And then we also have our social media icons and we have our browser add-on links. And I noticed that those didn't get highlighted in either case either. And I think those are the same case as the icons above, that they're actually font. They're font icons. So they're not getting recognized as images. All right, so let's go ahead and go back up here. And let's see, we want to replace images with all attributes. So this is actually going to take away any of the images on the page and show us their alt attribute. So here we have Aardvark logo, and I think we want to change that alt text to say Aardvark logo to the home page, because it is a link going back to the home page. And so that alt text has to do double duty, right? It has to explain to me what the image is that that is in that space. And then it also needs to explain to me what the purpose of that image is, because it is a functional image that when clicked takes me back to the home page of the site. All right. And then, of course, this image had no alt text, so it's just replaced by an empty box. Same for all of these. And then here we have that, that image that I was wondering about here, which does say accessible website icon. I would say probably that one is decorative. Let me put it back just to remind you of what that looked like. So it is a little website with the universal access logo kind of over top, looking like it's a little medal on the website. I don't know that that's actually communicating any kind of information on this page, and could probably go without having alt text. Although I don't know, if somebody had a really good argument for that not being a decorative image, I would definitely hear them out. I could be convinced otherwise, I think. Let's go ahead and replace these again, and let's take a look. Yes, so see how these didn't even get replaced? So that plugin is not picking those up as images. And then here's our Aardvark logo in the footer, and then these are not getting picked up as images either. Oh. So it looks like we have a couple of little adjustments that we need to make on this page as a result of taking a look at those images, but let's keep going and let's take a look at our next thing. Next is making sure that we have headings. If you could just excuse me for just 1 second. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, headings. So what we want to make sure with headings is that they have a meaningful hierarchy, and then we also want to check that the headings describe the bit of content that comes immediately after them, so that they are actually setting apart sections of the page. All right. And here we go, how to check headings with the Web Dev toolbar. All right, in the toolbar, we're going to click Information and then View Document Outline. And this is actually kind of a fun little feature of this plugin. So if I go to Information and then View Document Outline, it actually opens a new tab that will show me that there are 23 headings on this page, which seems like a lot for a relatively simple page. But let's go ahead and take a look at what they are. So we have an H1 that says simplify compliance with powerful accessibility features, an H2 that says everything you need for accessibility compliance. So generally speaking, you want to have one H1 on a page, and this is true both for accessibility and for SEO. This is kind of where SEO and accessibility meet with one another. And then the sections of the page should be separated from the rest of the content with H2s, and then subsections should start with H3s. So let's take a look. So this is our H1 for the page, simplify compliance with powerful accessibility features. That's the main idea of our page, which seems reasonable given that it's a feature page. Then the first section of our content is everything you need for accessibility compliance. And there are 4 subsections under that called audit management, visual mode, remediation management, and scanning and monitoring. So that all looks good, I think. So that's this section here. So here's our H1 at the top of the page. Here's our H2 for this section of content. And then we have subsections for each one of the 4 features. Okay, so that's all looking good so far. Then we have a section of the page called Join Us in Building a More Inclusive Web. Let's go take a look at what that looks like. So yeah, so that's a section of the content, I would say, yes, and that is appropriate. Then we have another section called Why Choose Aardvark that has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 subsections underneath it. So let's go take a look at what that looks like. Okay, so this is our section, Why Choose Aardvark. And then here are our subsections underneath it. And I think in this case, that is actually appropriate because we have a little paragraph of text for audit management. And for each one of these, we have a little paragraph of text. And here's our 8 H3s, right, going through the page. So those all look good. And we would just want to make sure, does this heading specify what comes immediately after it? And looking at it quickly, it does look like each of those headings does tell me what this little bit of content immediately after it is. All right, and then we have a section called Free Accessibility Scans for your homepage. Let's go take a look at what that looks like. That is this little section. There's not much content here, right? It's a pretty simple little section, but it is its own little section of the site, or the page rather. And then we have another H2 for all-in-one solution for seamless accessibility management. And we have 5 subsections underneath that. So I believe that that is the footer. Yeah. So that is the footer of the website. So we're using this as the kind of header for the footer area, right? To set it aside as its own section of content. And then within that, we have these 5 subsections that are going to help me find different bits of content on the website. So all in all, that looks pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and close it out and we can go back over here to easy checks. And our next easy check is to check contrast ratio. So we want to make sure that any bits of text that are on the page have sufficient contrast with their background. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. So in our header area or the hero area of the page, we have a light blue background with, it looks like, I don't think that's quite black text. I think it's actually very dark blue, but it has sufficient contrast with the background, right? Like it is many shades darker than the background, and there's no issue with reading that. And then we have white text on a blue button, which has sufficient contrast. And let me just show you quickly how we would test that if you weren't sure how you could go ahead and test that. So you'd want to use this color picker, and you can see that it gives you this little picking tool. So I want to pick the background color. So here's my background color, and it's highlighted for me already. So I'm going to copy it, and I'm going to go back over to our color contrast checker, and here's my box for background color, and I'll paste that in there. And you'll see that that turns to that color that I'm using for the background on my page. And then I want to go ahead and close that and pick the color picker again. And now I want to pick the text. So there's my text color. And again, I will copy that number. It's already highlighted. So I just hit Command C. I'm on a Mac. So Command C on the keyboard, it would be Control C if you're on Windows. And I'm going to paste that into the foreground color. And you can see, yes, that is actually a very dark blue. My contrast ratio between the foreground and the background is 12.9 to 1, which is high enough to pass everything. So it doesn't matter if it's small text or large text, or if it's, a user interface component or an icon or whatever. That contrast between this shade, this light shade of blue, that's the background, and this very dark shade of blue, that is the text color, is sufficient contrast. So I do already know that our brand color has sufficient contrast with white. So that's good enough. So let's go down through the page and look for anything that looks like it might be on the edge. So that one looks fine. Okay, so everything here looks good. So I think there's actually not much to do as far as contrast checks on this page. So let's go back over to the easy checks and let's figure out what our next test is. All right, so the next is to resize the text. And we want to make sure that when we make our text larger, that we don't run into this kind of situation where If the text is the default size, the layout looks fine, but when we zoom in the text, we get lots of overlapping content. It makes it very difficult, right, to actually read this content and to figure out what's happening. And you can imagine that if these were interactive elements, right, if these were links or buttons, now they're overlapping with each other. Which one am I actually going to click if I put my mouse over it, etc. So I could show you over here. So it tells me how to, what we want to do this test is increase the text size, and we want to make sure that that all of the text gets larger. We don't want any text left out. We want to make sure that it doesn't disappear or get cut off. We want to make sure it doesn't overlap. We want to make sure that any buttons or form fields are still visible and usable. And we want to make sure that horizontal scrolling isn't required to read sentences. So we want to make sure the text is still wrapping to the next line and staying inside the window. So I've already done this to change my Firefox to text only zoom. So we can do that already. And let's go ahead and run this test. So on your keyboard, on Windows, it's Control +sign. On Mac, it's Command +sign. And you can see on the address bar, you can actually see what the scroll level is. So we're at 110. We want to take it to 200. Okay. And here we want to go ahead and look for any issues. So I'm trying to horizontal scroll and it's not happening. So I don't have any horizontal scrolling. My header, it doesn't look as pretty, but it is still usable. The content wrapped, nothing's getting cut off. And I can still access all of these links with no problem. So that's good. My sign up link, likewise. Right? It's not as aesthetically pleasing as it was before we zoomed in on the text, but it is actually fine. Now, we do have an issue with our help beacon, right? Which that is a third-party beacon that's being provided by the company that we use to manage our support tickets. So I don't know that we'd actually be able to fix that. We might have to file a support ticket with that company to get that fixed. But we would want to note that this is a problem that we have on the site and to see what we can do about getting it fixed. All right, and then I'm just going to go down section by section of the page, and I'm going to look for text that didn't get zoomed in. I'm going to look for overlapping text, and I'm going to look for cut off text. So far, aside from our little help beacon here, everything is looking good. And, it does, of course, not look as pretty, right? But that's not what we're checking for. It not looking as pretty doesn't actually break the page for anybody. We're actually looking for it to be broken. And so far, it all looks pretty good. Yep, nothing is wrapping. Okay, here we go. Here, not quite overlapping, but very close, right? So, and this is going to be a tough one to deal with because we have, this is remediation management, is what this one says, right? Having a hard time highlighting all of it. And then this is ongoing monitoring. So I think the issue, of course, here is that remediation and management are two quite long words, right? And we do have 4 columns here. And so this will be a little bit of a challenge, but we can maybe take a look and see if we can maybe force CSS to hyphenate those words and break them onto multiple lines. That might be an option when the text gets zoomed in. Let's go ahead and look at the other 4 columns. So those actually don't overlap. So this one actually gets really close, but we luckily have a very short word next to a very long word, so they don't actually overlap. And then here we do have 2 kind of long words next to each other. And even then, they don't actually overlap. They just kind of touch. But I would like to see if there was something we could maybe do to make that better. And then we have huge, huge text. Okay, here we do have overlapping text right here. And we have some touching text and we have some overlapping links, and you can see how this makes it difficult, right? These are only overlapping a little bit, so it's still pretty easy. If I wanted to click on audit management, I obviously have plenty of areas where I can put my mouse over audit management to check it, but over here it's a little bit harder. And then here we have some overlap, and here we have where they're kind of running into one another. So this might be another area where maybe we want to look into having CSS hyphenate these to prevent them from actually growing outside of their container. And the footer actually looks okay. Nothing is overlapping or cut off. So we do have a couple of areas on the page that we might want to look at and clean up a little bit. Now, to put the text back to just normal size, it would be Control-0 on Windows or Command-0 on Mac. It just takes us immediately back to the 100% size. All right, let's keep going. Keyboard access. All right, so let's go down to what to do. So interestingly, we have some information that Opera doesn't support keyboard navigation. I don't think that is still true. This article is actually quite old, which is why we saw those really outdated screenshots. So now, if you are on a Mac, you do actually have to go into your system settings and turn on keyboard accessibility, which is a little surprising to me, right? In Windows, it's just turned on by default. You don't have to turn anything on, but be aware that if you are on a Mac and you want to do some accessibility testing, you do have to go into your system preferences as it describes here and turn that on. I did that on mine years ago, right? So mine is already on, but do be aware that that is something that you need to do. All right, and then we want to click in the address bar, then put our mouse aside and not use it. And we want to just navigate through the page with using the tab key. And here's what we're going to make sure that we can tab to everything, that any kind of interactive element on the page, that we can tab to it, that we can tab away from things. So there is an interesting issue that can happen, which is called a keyboard trap, where you can tab to something, but then it's code actually get back out actually away. So we want to check for that and check for any kind of keyboard trap. We want to make sure that the tab order follows an order that makes sense, that we can reasonably predict where focus is going to move next when we hit the tab key. We want to make sure that we can see where the focus is, so we can see what the active element is currently. We want to make sure that we can get to all functionality with just the keyboard. So for example, in our main navigation, we have those drop-down menus. So we want to make sure we can get to those with the keyboard. That's a pretty common issue, actually, that you cannot get to drop-down menus using just a keyboard. And then there are some, for drop-down lists, you want to make sure that you can navigate those with arrow keys. And when images are links, they should also have visual focus. So let's go ahead. We'll follow those instructions. Let me go back up to the top of the page. I'm going to click in the address bar. I just hit the escape key to close that huge menu that closed down. Okay, I'm going to put my mouse over here and not going to use the mouse. I'm just going to use one finger on the tab key on my keyboard, and we'll see what happens. All right, so first we're going to go through some browser settings. Oops. And then we got, okay, so that looks like the last browser setting. So we're into the web page. So our first thing that pops up is we have a skip link that shows up that lets me skip to contact support. Because we have that little floating icon, right? The little beacon that's in the lower right-hand corner. We want to have an easy way to get there for keyboard users, right? So that they don't have to tab all the way to the bottom of the page. So let's just test that and make sure that it works. So I'm just going to hit the enter key. And you can see that a little outline showed up there, right? And now my help key has focus. And if I hit the enter key again, it's going to open the interface where I can start filing a support ticket. Now, if you're not used to navigating with a keyboard, you might be thinking, oh my gosh, how do we get out of this now that we're in here? So you should always be able to get out of something like this with the escape key. So let's try it out. I'm going to hit the escape key, and it looks like it refreshed this box, but it does not actually close it. So that is an issue that we would want to file. And again, this is a third-party beacon that we're using on the website. So that's something that we would have to file with them to see if they would fix it. And my experience with them in the past has been that they're reasonably willing to work with us on things like that. So I went ahead and tab through all the fields of the form, and I'm back at the help button at the lower right. And I think if I hit the enter key now, it will close the beacon. All right, so I think it would have been more ideal if I could hit the escape key and it would close that support form and move the focus back to the beacon. All right, so I'm going to now, we're back up at the top of the page because that beacon is the last thing on the page. All right, we're back to skip to contact support. So now we have a skip to content button. And I just want to see if that works. And it did move me down into the content of the page. And when I hit tab again, it puts the focus on the register button. So that did let me skip over the navigation at the top of the page. So that's successful. So nothing to file there. So I am going to hit Shift Tab now to go back. I'm going to go back to skip to content and we'll pick up where we left off. So let's tab again. And we're on this link to the home page that's on the logo. So that all looks good. I tab again and I can get to the features link on the navigation. I tab again and I get to the about. Now, how do I get to those items that are in the drop-down menu? Let's see if we can figure it out. So let's shift tab back over to features and hit the enter key. And there we go. We've opened up the submenu. And ideally, I think this might be a case where we would maybe expect the arrow keys to move us around in there, but they don't. But the tab key does work. So I can tab through here and get to all of those. And then the about, and it looks like maybe there is a setting with this menu where it kind of remembers that you want things to be open, because as soon as I tap to about, it opened the submenu, which is not necessarily what I would have expected, right? I might have expected it to act like the features button where I had focus on features and I had to actually hit the enter key to open that submenu. So I'd be curious if I go back to about and hit the enter key to close that again. Yeah, and then it goes back to a state where it's doesn't open the menus by default. So that's a little bit odd, but it's not a barrier, right? It's not preventing me from being able to do something. So I think I won't file any issues on that. And then let's make sure we can get to everything under solutions, and we can. And what I just tested was hitting the escape key to close out that menu. So escape should always close things like that. So that worked in that case. So let's go ahead and keep going. And focus moves right along. So I would expect focus now to move to the try artwork for free button that we can see right there at the bottom of the screen. And that is where it moves. So that's a good sign that our focus is moving in a way that makes sense. All right, now we have focus on learn about audit management. Then we have learn more about visual mode. And then we have learn about remediation management, learn about scanning and monitoring. And that's pretty interesting because our tab moved us to some text that I wouldn't expect would actually be able to receive focus because it's not interactive. So I definitely want to take a look at what's going on there. I would not expect that text to be able to receive focus. So that's something that we'll take a look at. And we have get started today, try artwork for free. And now we should just tab through all of the links in the footer. We'll just do a quick check, make sure that all of those work. And they do. And now we should, okay, I forgot we have this very bottom part of the footer. We'll tab through there. And then finally to the help beacon. So overall, our keyboard accessibility on this page is actually looking pretty good. All right, so we didn't quite get to all of the accessibility checks. We have a few more to do. Forms, labels, and errors. We don't actually have a form on this page, so we wouldn't have to do this test at all. And what else do we have? Moving, flashing, or blinking content. We don't actually have any of that on this page, so we wouldn't need to do that anyway. And then we don't have any multimedia either. So is that actually, okay, then we have a basic structure check. So let me go ahead and do that real quick before I wrap up the live stream. So the Web Dev Toolbar actually makes this really easy to do if you just go to the CSS tab and you say disable all styles. And what you will get is what your page looks like with absolutely no CSS on it. And this is a good way to see what the structure of your page actually looks like. Now we do have something weird on our page that I haven't quite figured out why this is happening, but the little arrows that show up on our drop-down menu, for some reason with CSS turned off, show up enormous. They show up absolutely enormous. I don't know why. And it makes our navigation look very wacky in this view. So that's something I'm going to have to take a look at and figure out why that's happening. But once we get past, and there's our hamburger menu, once I get past all of those icons, the rest of the page, oh my gosh, here we go. The rest of the page should look pretty normal. If I can get past all of those, let's see. Okay, here we go. Here's where we actually start the content for the website. So we'll just go ahead and take a look at it and make sure that everything is looking the way that we would expect. All right, so we have simplify compliance and everything you need. We have a link to try Aardvark for free. So this all looks good. We have audit management. We again have bizarrely enormous icons. We have those little check boxes. Let me go ahead and refresh this just to kind of show you what we're looking at here. It's these little check boxes. I don't know why they show up so huge once we turn off CSS. That's something kind of weird that we'll probably want to take a look at because that's not expected to me. That shouldn't be happening. So let me go down, down, down. Whoops. Turn off CSS. Okay. Wait, why does it keep turning it back on? Disable all styles. Okay. Okay, there we go. Let me go down, 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 down. The icons behaving that way does make this view harder than it normally is. It's usually pretty straightforward. But we have to deal with these giant icons. So we'll go past those. All right, and then we have visual mode and a bunch of giant icons with it's just a bulleted list, an unordered list, but the icons show up enormous. Learn about visual mode, and then we have remediation management, and then we have bulleted lists with icons that show up enormous. Okay, and then here's our section of content. Join us in building a more inclusive web, a paragraph, a link, another heading with some content after it, some more enormous icons for no reason whatsoever. And then aside from the icons being enormous, the structure of the content actually looks pretty decent. I wonder, those are font icons. I was going to say maybe I could just turn off images, but they're not images, they're font icons, which makes it challenging. All right, and then we're all the way to the bottom of the page. So here's our little section on free accessibility scans, and then here's our footer. So our all-in-one solution for seamless accessibility management and the sections of our footer. It is interesting that everything is repeated. So that's a little odd. So I would definitely want to look into that. And then our social media icons are at the bottom of the page and showing up enormous. So here they are. But aside from them showing up enormous, the structure is actually fine. And here's our, the very bottom of our page, and our help icon. So that is a quick structure check just to make sure that content is in a order that makes sense, that the headings come before the sections of content that they describe, and that heading levels and things like that are good. So we did actually get through all of the WCAG easy checks on this page because we don't have all of the types of content that we need to check as part of that. So thank you so much for joining me today. We'll go ahead and wrap this up right now. I'll next be doing a live stream 2 weeks from today, and I am hoping that that is going to be a demo of using the NVDA screen reader with Firefox. That is going to depend upon me getting my laptop that I've ordered in time, right? So I had to order a Windows laptop to be able to do those demos, and fingers crossed that that will be here in time. Of course, 2 weeks away should be plenty of time, but that is what I am planning to do next time. So we'll do a live demo of NVDA, and I hope you can join us next time. Thank you so much. If you need help fixing the accessibility on your website, do go to aardvarkaccessibility.com or a20y.com and give it a try. It is free to scan your homepage, and no credit card is required for that trial account. It is free forever to scan just the homepage of your website and find all of the accessibility issues that are there, and we'll give you instructions for how you could go ahead and get those fixed. And get in touch with our support team if you have any questions. We are always happy to answer your questions. Thank you so much for joining me today, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.